The conference room smelled like overbrewed coffee and stale ambition. It was a Wednesday morning, one of those crisp spring days in Chicago, where the sun tries its best, but the wind always wins. Inside the glass walls of Helix Dynamics' downtown office, Elise Carter sat reviewing cross-market data trends, surrounded by open tabs, analytics dashboards, and a half-eaten protein bar. Her mind was deep in quarter-end strategy, until the door burst open. No knock, no heads up, just Kyle Brenner, Chief Executive Officer and King of the Ego Parade, barreling in like a man on a mission. His perfectly sculpted hair was slightly out of place, a sign that he'd either been pacing or preening. "Elise," he barked, throwing a manila folder onto her desk like it owed him money. "We need to talk." Her stomach turned, but her expression didn't budge. After 4 years working under Kyle, she had mastered the art of staying calm while chaos raged just inches away. She glanced at the folder. No need to open it. She already knew what it said. "The board's shifting gears," Kyle announced, like he was reciting lines from a badly written corporate play. "We need bold, visible leadership, not background operators." "Ah," Elise said flatly. "So, I'm being let go." Kyle didn't even flinch. "This isn't personal." That was a joke. Of course it was personal. Elise, 36, had led Helix's digital product division through 3 consecutive growth quarters. She'd streamlined workflows, introduced automation tools that cut operational costs by 30%, and her team had the lowest turnover rate in the company. But Kyle couldn't see that. He only saw what he wanted to see, himself reflected in everyone around him. "You're being released effective immediately," he added, tone clipped. "It will deactivate your access by 5 p.m. HR has your paperwork." Elise gave a slow nod. "May I ask why?" "You're brilliant," Kyle said, almost like a concession. "But you lack leadership presence. You're great with systems, not people. We need someone who commands the room." Elise didn't move, didn't blink, because what Kyle didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that she wasn't just Elise Carter, department head. She was Elise Carter, 85% shareholder of Helix Dynamics. And in 4 days, she'd be sitting in his chair. Kyle was still waiting for a meltdown, a slammed door, a fiery monologue. Instead, she extended her hand with calm precision. "Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate the clarity." He hesitated, clearly confused by the lack of drama, then offered a weak handshake and walked out, puffed up like a man who thought he'd won. Elise sat back down and stared at the photo on her desk. Her mother, Janet Carter, grinning ear to ear at the grand opening of Helix's first office, a shared WeWork unit with broken furniture and dreams bigger than their budget. Her fingers brushed the frame. "You told me to wait until it mattered," she whispered. "And now it does." Let me rewind. You need to understand why this moment didn't break her, it made her. Elise had grown up in the shadow of Helix. Her mother started the company in a garage turned office in Cleveland, back when tech was still being treated like a gamble. Janet believed in 2 things, integrity and vision. She built Helix brick by brick, starting with no investors, no marketing team, just sheer grit and a belief that people, real people, should matter more than numbers. Elise spent weekends watching her mother sketch ideas on napkins and build wireframes from scratch. She'd curl up on the floor beneath her mom's desk with Legos and math puzzles, while Janet negotiated licensing deals over speakerphone. "If you want to lead," Janet used to say, "you have to know what it feels like to build something with your hands." When Janet passed away from cancer 5 years ago, Elise was 31 and fresh off her MBA. She stepped into Helix with no fanfare, joining as a mid-level analyst. She didn't want handouts or shortcuts. She wanted to earn her place. Over the next few years, she quietly rotated through departments, support, sales, product, analytics, learning every inch of the company's DNA. Then Kyle Brenner entered the picture. He arrived like a storm in designer loafers, slick, smiling, and full of phrases like synergy and disruptive architecture. The board, always eager for shiny new packaging, welcomed him with open arms. To them, he was a vision of the future, Ivy League polish, an impressive Rolodex, and the kind of confidence that always bordered on arrogance. To Elise, he was a walking red flag. Kyle didn't understand Helix culture. He didn't value loyalty or collaboration. His first order of business was to modernize the company. Translation, lay off legacy staff and bring in his hand-picked consultants, most of whom spent more time crafting PowerPoint decks than building anything real. Meetings turned theatrical. Anyone who questioned him got sidelined. Ideas only mattered if they came out of Kyle's mouth. Elise watched entire departments turn cold and transactional. Morale dipped. Innovation slowed. But she stayed. Not for him, for the people. Her division was one of the few still thriving. She fostered open channels, created mentorship pipelines, and gave credit where it was due. When she proposed a machine learning tool that slashed campaign costs by 40%, Kyle said it was too vague. 2 weeks later, he pitched the same idea at a board meeting as his own. Elise said nothing. She had her eyes on a bigger game. She worked nights and weekends refining a proprietary analytics platform. Her team called it Pulse, a real-time engine for behavioral market prediction. It got picked up in industry publications. Clients called it revolutionary. At the launch gala, Kyle raised a champagne flute and toasted the bold leadership that got us here. He didn't even mention Elise or her team. But that didn't bother her, because 2 weeks earlier, she'd received a letter from her mother's estate attorney. It read simply, "On your 35th birthday, you will receive the rest of what your mother built for you. Until then, keep watching, keep learning." Now she understood. Janet had left Elise a controlling interest in Helix, sealed in a trust, hidden from the board, waiting for the moment Elise would need it most. And now, that moment had arrived. The day after her firing, Elise didn't cry. She didn't vent. She didn't even touch the bottle of wine waiting in her fridge. Instead, she opened her laptop, created a new folder titled Transition Plan, and began outlining everything she would need to restore Helix from the inside out, not revenge. This wasn't about bruised pride. It was about honoring the legacy of a company that had lost its soul under the weight of corporate showmanship. She met with Charles Levin, her family's estate attorney, in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. It was a far cry from Helix's sterile boardrooms. Dim lighting, oak paneling, and the familiar comfort of hushed tones and espresso. Charles handed her a thick envelope, sealed in red wax with her mother's initials. Inside were 2 documents, a letter from Janet and a trust agreement transferring 85% of Helix Dynamics shares directly to Elise, effective as of her 35th birthday, which had passed just days ago. Janet's letter was short but powerful. "You've earned this not because of your name, but because of your choices. I've watched you lead with grace when it would have been easier to shout. You know this company better than anyone, and now it's yours to protect." Elise's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the realization that she wasn't alone anymore. For years, she had navigated hostile waters quietly, trusting that competence would eventually speak louder than arrogance. Her mother had seen it all from afar and prepared accordingly. This wasn't just about stock. It was about trust, real trust, the kind that goes beyond contracts and boardroom politics. That same afternoon, Elise reviewed Helix's latest internal metrics. The company was stagnating. Revenue growth had plateaued. Employee retention was in the red. Exit surveys painted a bleak picture. Words like disconnected, superficial leadership, and toxic hierarchy popped up repeatedly. Kyle's charisma was wearing thin, and the cracks were visible to anyone who bothered to look. But Elise didn't rush. She waited. 5 days after her firing, she filed the paperwork to call an emergency shareholder meeting, using her controlling interest to set the agenda. She gave Kyle and the board just enough time to relax, to assume she'd walked away quietly. Rumors began to swirl. Whispers that Elise had taken a job with a rival firm, or decided to start her own venture. Kyle apparently told a few close contacts that she wasn't built for the spotlight anyway. He'd never understand that the strongest people don't seek spotlights. They build them for others. The night before the meeting, Elise sat in her living room, a legal binder open beside her and her mother's old Helix hoodie draped across the back of the couch. No speech, no theatrics, just a few bullet points and the truth. She ironed her navy moose suit and pressed the collar flat. It wasn't armor, it was a reminder of who she'd become and what she'd already overcome. On the morning of the shareholder meeting, Elise walked through the front doors of Helix Dynamics for the first time since her firing. The receptionist's eyes widened but said nothing as Elise passed. No need to explain. The meeting had already begun upstairs. But she wasn't late. She was arriving exactly when she meant to. Charles Levin met her at the elevator, files in hand, voice steady. "They think it's a quarterly strategy session." Elise nodded. Perfect. When she entered the boardroom, Kyle was mid-presentation, gesturing toward a colorful graph and rattling off buzzwords with practiced flair. His voice faltered when he saw her. "Elise," he said sharply, "this meeting is for board members." She calmly set a thick folder on the polished table and took the seat at the head. "Exactly," she replied. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, curiosity quickly turning into disbelief as Elise handed out printed copies of the trust agreement. Charles distributed notarized confirmations, legal citations, and voting records. "This document," she said clearly, "grants me 85% ownership and full voting rights as of 5 days ago. The transfer is legal, binding, and active." Kyle scoffed, standing so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. No one told me anything about this." "You weren't supposed to know," Elise said, her tone even. "My mother placed this trust in secrecy for a reason. She wanted me to see what Helix had become without interference. And now that I have, it's time to act." Mr. Rand, the longest-serving board member, adjusted his glasses as he flipped through the paperwork. "It's all here, verified, time-stamped, and fully executable." Kyle laughed bitterly. "So what now? You want my resignation?" Elise opened a second folder, performance audits, employee complaints, financial inefficiencies. She laid them out, one by one, each piece a brick in the case she was about to build. "No," she said, "I want accountability." The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in precision. Elise presented data, not opinions. She walked through turnover statistics, highlighted key clients lost under Kyle's leadership, and exposed bloated executive bonuses. She read aloud excerpts from whistleblower emails detailing discriminatory practices that had been buried under pending investigation stamps. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. By the time she concluded, there was no rebuttal left to give. As majority shareholder, Elise said calmly, "I am invoking my right to call for immediate leadership change. Effective today, I am removing Kyle Brenner as CEO." Kyle went pale. "You're staging a coup." "No," she replied. "I'm protecting what my mother built." The room stayed quiet. No one defended him. No one objected. Mr. Rand gave a slow, solemn nod and motioned to the board secretary to record the decision. Kyle looked around the room, realizing for the first time that he had no ground left to stand on. Then he stormed out. Elise exhaled. But she wasn't done. Because this wasn't about one man's ego. This was about healing a company that had lost its way. The day after the boardroom shift, Elise didn't take the CEO's office. Not right away. She walked the halls of Helix Dynamics like any other employee, greeting familiar faces, asking questions, and listening more than she spoke. She passed cubicles that had once been bustling but now stood half empty. The air felt thin, as if the building itself had been holding its breath for too long. She knew this wasn't just about changing a name on the door. It was about repairing something deeper. Trust. On Monday morning, she called an all-hands meeting. No corporate lingo, no carefully rehearsed stage show, just Elise, a mic, and a conference room full of tired eyes and folded arms. People whispered as they entered, confused by the sudden call. Some looked surprised to see her standing at the front of the room. Others seemed uncertain. A few, like Maya from customer service and Ben from back-end engineering, gave small nods of encouragement. That was all she needed. "Some of you know me," Elise began. "Some of you only know what you've heard. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here because I care about what this company used to be and what it can still become." The room was silent. No one interrupted. "I was told I lacked presence," she said with a small smile. "That I wasn't loud enough to lead. Maybe that's true. I won't outshout people, but I will outwork them. I'll outlisten them. And I believe leadership isn't about who commands the room. It's about who builds it so others can stand tall inside it." She didn't drop slogans or offer empty promises. She talked about respect, about listening to interns the same way you'd listen to investors, about how innovation dies when fear takes root. Then she told them what was coming. The toxic managers gone. HR restructured. The old hierarchy that protected arrogance and punished humility dismantled. She promoted Maya, who'd spent 6 years advocating for customer needs but had been repeatedly passed over, to head of client experience. She brought back Kevin, the quiet genius engineer forced out by Kyle for being too niche-focused, and gave him a seat on the product strategy team. Elise made it clear, people first, always. In the weeks that followed, the shift was slow but unmistakable. Ideas started flowing again, not from the top down but from everywhere. Whiteboards filled up, Slack channels buzzed with real collaboration instead of one-way directives. People who had once shrunk into their desks now spoke up. Teams that had gone quiet started laughing again. The company felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. One afternoon, Elise passed a meeting room where someone had written on the whiteboard, "She came back." Not she won, not she took over. She came back. And that meant everything. Elise made time for everyone, every department, every floor. She walked with custodians during their rounds, sat with the marketing interns to hear what tools they actually used, listened to frontline staff who knew exactly why customers churned, even when the dashboard said otherwise. The changes didn't just look good on paper, they felt real. Revenue metrics began to climb. Not dramatically at first, but steadily. More importantly, the internal surveys showed a 42% jump in employee satisfaction within the first quarter. Clients that had quietly disengaged began returning. Industry analysts, once skeptical, began writing headlines like, "The Quiet Power at Helix's Helm." A year later, Elise stood by the glass wall of the executive floor, not as a figurehead, but as a leader who had earned every inch of ground beneath her feet. Her suit was tailored, professional, but still hers. She didn't wear a persona, she wore her truth. Helix posted its strongest quarter in 5 years. Retention was at an all-time high. The new platform, Pulse 2, now redesigned with Kevin's insights and Maya's client feedback, was poised to disrupt the analytics space even further. Behind Elise's desk sat a single photo, her mother, Janet, standing in front of a rented office space with nothing but a laptop and hope in her eyes. Elise whispered to the frame, "We did it." Not with rage, not with revenge, with resolve. She'd proven something many never get the chance to show, that you can be underestimated, silenced, even pushed out. But if you stay true to your values and wait for the right moment, you can come back and rebuild stronger than before. If you've ever been overlooked or made to feel small in a space you helped create, let Elisa's story remind you. It's not about shouting to be heard. It's about building something worth listening to. Quiet power is still power. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about strength, resilience, and the leaders who rise when no one's watching. And in the comments, tell me your story. Who underestimated you and how did you rise?